Welcome back to the Faith Ventures podcast. I'm Dr. Norman Horn, and this is a place where we tell inspiring stories of Christians doing business for the glory of God. Today, joining me is a special guest, Jake Wiskerchen, and we're just so glad to have you on board today. And I did it wrong again. I can't.
That's okay.
Right? Even my wife over there is telling me, like, she's already. My wife is over there telling me, like,
this is good radio. Everybody loves this. We were all forward. As a fellow podcast host myself, on the Walk the Talk America podcast, we had a thing. It was a running joke for a good 3 years. Like, if we didn't have a clunky intro and or a clunky end, it wasn't the Walk the Talk America podcast.
Well, we're going to keep going too. That's what we do here. And so, Jake, again, I'm so glad to have you on board. We met at Freedom Fest a couple months ago, and it resolved that we were going to do this together. We knew that it was going to take a little bit due to both of our schedules, but now we're here and we're going to talk about your business, Zephyr Wellness, the things that you're doing for the church and more broadly, and then specifically for your patients as well. Talk about mental health and the things that are involved in that, the misunderstandings that a lot of folks have around it. There's so many interesting things that we talked about even at Freedom Fest together, just briefly. I'm excited to unpack some of this together with you today. So thanks for joining me here, man.
I'm always grateful for an opportunity to talk to people, new audiences, old audiences, anywhere. I say very frequently, as often as I can, that this information doesn't do any good and locked up inside my head. So I try to push it out into people's, laps so they can use what I know to stay out of my clinic. Honestly, I'm trying to work this stuff of a job. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, Jake, let's start off by kind of describing, some of your journey and where you've come from. Let's talk about what does your career journey kind of look like? Some of the big highlights within it. How did you get to be this person that you are today and working in mental health like this?
Smart aleck answer or authentic?
It's a good one.
So, yeah, if we roll way back to childhood and high school, I've always had many irons in the fire and lots of activities, enrolled in multiple sports and after school clubs and that kind of thing. And so I coming out of high school, I thought I was going to be a chemical engineer because I loved chemistry. And turns out chemical engineering is not as much about chemistry as it is the engineering, and engineering is not really about much more than math. And I wasn't really good at the maths. So that lasted all the semester. And I thumbed through the course catalog and found something that looked attractive in the salary structure and called logistics. So I enrolled in business school and switched majors, and that lasted another couple of years because it turns out logistics is riddled with other kinds of maths that are not engineering related that I also don't like. And along the way, because of all the activities I continue to be a part of, I promise this will have relevance down the road as we tie it all together, I realized I like people. I really was involved in the campus culture, doing campus activities and lots of different interfaces and so forth, fraternity, Greek life, campus tours, student life, all that stuff. So thumbed through the course catalog again and found something called public relations, which sounded very attractive. And turns out that's in the journalism school. And back to a high school teacher of mine who said I should be a writer for a living. Of course I poo-pooed that because it wasn't fancy enough. But then I find myself in the journalism school. So enrolled in journalism school for public relations, graduated with that degree with a minor in business administration. But really what I wanted to do was be around people. And public relations has nothing to do with people and everything to do with writing. Thankfully, I was a good enough writer that made it through and sharpened my talents. But I never really let go of the idea that I wanted to do event planning and be around energetic, fun types of activities. So for the next 5 or 6 years, I launched a bunch of false start careers ranging from actual public relations, working as a publicist for one of the local casinos, to banking, private security, dabbled in insurance sales, lots of restaurant experience and food service, considered restaurant management at one point, tried out law enforcement, education, whatnot. So eventually I enrolled in a grad program at the behest of one of my old advisors for educational leadership. So I thought, maybe I can go back to campus. And I loved campus the first time around. This sounds like a good idea. So graduated undergrad in 2001, 2006, I started this grad program for educational leadership. And I thought, if I'm going to be a college student advisor, I need to take some counseling classes, because if my students are anything like I was, I'm going to be leaning on my advisors for lots of things. And I don't want to send them out worse than when they came into my door. So I took some counseling classes, dabbled in that realm, ended up meeting by complete happenstance a guy who ended up becoming a very, very good friend of mine, Dr. Christian Conti, who has been an outsized influence in my life and a major role model. And I will mention him because he has so much content that's very, very good that you should look him up. The last name is Conte. And I think the book I'd want everybody to read is called Walking Through Anger. It has a little bit to do with anger, but mostly to do with his yield theory. But anyway, we met playing softball and became friends. Turns out he's a professor in the counseling program, and I could take some counseling classes as elective. So I did, and fell in love with counseling. Graduated in 2008. That was a bad economy. I was trying to find a job at a university somewhere. Landed up at Lake Tahoe. That was not a very good experience. Lasted all of 2 months there. Came back down and went to work for Christian Conti he was a clinical director of a local agency in town. So I was doing basically paraclinical work, working in homes with children and some adults, but mostly children and adolescents, teaching them social skills. Did that for about 2 years. Re-enrolled in another graduate program for counseling, and emerged a year and a half later. Accelerated through that, secured some crossover and so forth. And got licensed in 2012. Early 2012, I got licensed as a marriage and family therapist intern in the state of Nevada. 2 years later, the intern dropped off and I became fully licensed. 2015, we founded Zephyr Wellness, and there's more to say along the way. But that's basically the backdrop, is that through a series of trying to find myself and false start careers, I didn't necessarily pick counseling, but lo and behold, here I am working with people as a part of their lives, influencing them in happy, positive ways. It's not exactly event planning, public relations. It's not exactly journalism, but I do write a lot. It's not exactly chemical engineering whatsoever, but I'm having fun. And I think the variety of experiences through all the miseries from 2001 through, wow, really, we didn't become profitable as a company until just recently, have laid a good foundation for me to be able to relate with a lot of people and help guide them through whatever strife and struggle they're encountering. So the Christian parallel to this, because this is a Faith Ventures podcast, is that I was raised Catholic by my parents. So I'm, wrist on forehead, recovering Catholic. About 15 and a half, 16 years old, I didn't want to go to church anymore because church was boring. So I used the excuse of my part-time job to not go to church on Sundays or Saturdays. And something always stuck with me. And that was that I would see a very small handful of people in these Catholic masses who seemed very dedicated to what was going on, eyes closed, hands out, while everybody else is just eyes rolling, mouth drooling. And I couldn't quite connect that. I thought there was something there that I was missing, and it never left me. So fast forward from 15, 16 years old to my final semester in college, really, I got introduced to something called Champions for Christ, which was the athlete community at UNR, University of Nevada, Reno. And I was not an athlete. I just knew a lot of them. So I started hanging out with these athletes, these college athletes who were doing a Bible study basically on Wednesday nights or whatever. And I thought, this is probably where I need to be. It was more intellectually driven. It was centered on scripture. It didn't have a lot of the pomp and circumstance. In fact, there was just some dude who happened to play tight end for the football team strumming a guitar, and some other gal who, played volleyball singing. And they were guided by a man from the community in his 40s. And there I was, like, trying to make sense of it all. But I knew there was truth there. And I knew there was something that was pure and needed exploration. So from that, I just kept doing the Bible study thing, resisted church, didn't really want to go to church because I knew what church, quote unquote, was in my own head. Eventually went to church, quote unquote, with some of the guys from Set Bible Study and a local middle school gymnasium. And I thought, okay, this isn't so bad. I'm not overwhelmed with judgment. In fact, these people seem really welcoming. The study, and it was a study, was quite intellectual, which is where I was at the time. I needed the cerebral part of it. And 2006, January 29, 2006, I got rebaptized, I guess, because I got baptized as a little baby in the Catholic tradition. On been on the journey ever since. And it's been full of potholes and successes, faiths and doubts, and a lot of what I believe scripturally and faith-wise informs my decision-making as a business owner and as a community participant in lots of things. And in fact, the tagline on Zephyr Wellness is an innovative and philanthropic mental health practice. And that's specifically because I try to follow Jesus the best that I can, seeing myself as a conduit through which God's resources flow for others in the community. So it's not an overt presentation. We don't have a Jesus fish on the sign or anything, but that definitely influences what I do. And I wear it on my sleeve. I don't browbeat people about the head and shoulders with my faith, but people know where I stand if they dig even marginally into my background. So I will pause there because I've been ranting for a little while.
No, that's good.
And reflect.
Well, you're exposing, so much of yourself here in so many positive ways. I really appreciate that, because you're talking about a journey that has, been, with a lot of twists and turns, and ending up, but with kind of a common thread of trying to, get toward a more personal interaction with people on a regular basis. And that has led you, like you said, counseling you didn't exactly choose counseling, but it sounds like kind of counseling sort of attracted you in this kind of interesting way because of its interaction with people and your experiences, that have led you to that point. And so this is good, because like it seems like you've got a lot of different experiences, and that should help you, right, in kind of getting to a point of understanding other people, how they think, how they act. And so, as well as your faith journey, they're also informing that as well. So that's really interesting to me. I'm curious as to, what are some of those kind of big touch points that you kind of refer to as like, these were really critical points. You've mentioned, okay, on your faith journey, it was getting involved with the Champions for Christ. In your professional life, it was meeting Christian Conte, which I did see him on your website in my kind of preliminary investigations of what you were doing. And I think that's really interesting and a great book recommendation. I'm going to have to check that out. But what are some of those points of which, in addition to that, like some of those major kind of turning points, and like this affected the way that I think, this affected my pathway forward, either from a professional or faith point of view there, and that kind of, if those mesh together in a particular way. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
As I'm thinking about it, there are many. But it's fascinating how it's tapestry weaves together, because you don't think about the threads, you just look at the cloth.
Mm-hmm.
And some things are jumping out. So let me highlight those. So you mentioned Champions for Christ, which was honestly, it's something I hadn't told that story for, I don't even know. It's been a long, long time, but it's fun because I get to go back and talk about it. The major things that are jumping out, I think, are the people in my life who, whether or not they realized it, played a very large role. So some of them are still around, some of them are not, and I don't know that that's here or there. But when I get guided by people who care very deeply about me, I tend to listen pretty closely. And it's the ones who really put their foot in my butt and say, you're not going to skate on this, right?
Yeah.
One of them is Christian. He introduced me to the works of Carl Jung, and I thought that it was so fascinating. In my first go around grad school, this is now late 2007 and early 2008. This is a story we're telling. So one day after softball, go ahead.
You may want to inform people a little bit, like for those who still know, who is Carl Jung, and like why is that kind of I know the critical importance. So we'll get there. All right.
So after softball one night, and this is just a random softball team I was playing on with my brother and some other people I knew from the university. There's this guy who kind of looks like a construction worker, and I'm trying to figure out how he fits into the mix. And it turns out it's Dr. Conte. And it's because he teaches at UNR with a lot of the people I knew. So I'm sitting there talking to him. We're having beers and chicken wings or whatever at the local sports bar. And I'm all excited because I'm enrolled in this class where I'm learning about Jungian analytic psychology. Now, Jung is spelled J-U-N-G, Carl Gustav Jung. You can look up his work. He's one of the legends in our field. Studied with Sigmund Freud, who most people know. And what his work centered on was the idea of this psyche. Psyche is Greek for the word soul. And it is said that the Greek goddess Psyche, Psyche, was the goddess of the human soul. So I explain on the Zephyr Wellness YouTube channel as our opening video, like how do we get our name Zephyr? Well, come to find out, there's this legend in Greek mythology where Psyche, the goddess of the human soul, was set to marry a monster by decree, and she was unhappy with this, so she's going to take her life by jumping off a cliff. And before she could do it, Zephyr, the god of the west wind, came and swept her and didn't allow her to splat on the ground. He set her down gently on the field and then blew away. So Zephyr is rescuing human souls, and that's where we got our name. But back to Psyche. Psyche is to describe the soul. The soul these days is loosely translated to mean mind, and we could split hairs over the differences between the two, but it doesn't really matter. But the word psychology, ology is a suffix that means the study of. So you're literally studying the human soul. And I think we've lost track of that in my field, my profession recently, where everything is evidence-based now. I'll put that in air quotes too, evidence-based practice. Like, if you can't see it, touch it, quantify it, box it up, measure it, then it's no good. And so we're starting to throw out the analytic psychology, the psychoanalytic, I guess you could say, methods, modalities, and traditions in favor of the behavioral therapies, CBT, REBT, DBT. Now, and that's because the way you measure stuff, it becomes quantifiable. You can publish the quantifiable things, and then it comes with more money to fund more studies of the thing. Now, the problem with this is my outward behavioral expressions are not reflective of who I am as a human being and my soul. They're just simply something that you see, and that's usually how I deal with stuff. So I may, for example, come into the therapy office and say, I've got a problem with alcohol or smoking or whatever. And the therapist, through their behavioral modification techniques, which do work, and I'm not poo-pooing on them at all. I just don't think they're the be-all, end-all. They may get me to quit smoking or drinking, but I want to know why I started smoking or drinking in the first place. So I learned about this Carl Jung guy, and I'm learning about the concepts of the psyche and how deep we all are, and how it's really divine. The concept of the self, capital S, is said to be a divine creation. It's a spark of God within us. And that really resonated with me. And I thought that was really fascinating. So I'm sitting there with Christian, we're drinking our beers, and he's a professor, but I haven't taken any classes from him. And he says, yeah, I really like this Jung stuff too. And if I could imagine the psyche, it would be like a circle, and up on top you have like the ego, and that's your consciousness, that's your familiar area. And then below that, you got the subconscious that separates out from the unconscious. And the unconscious is where the self is. We're always trying to explore the self. And I think anyway, it would look something like this. And he goes, oh, and he pulls up his sleeve on his shirt, and there's a tattoo of the psyche right there on his shoulder. And he's a big dude. So it's a big picture. And I was just there like, you're the coolest guy I've ever met. What is this? You got a tattoo of the psyche on your shoulder. And we sparked a friendship, and I said, I'd love to take some classes from you. So I did. And in studying with him and having him teach me this Jungian analytic psychological stuff, I found that my newly found Christian faith, which is all of a year and a half, 2 years old at this point, went hand in glove with the field of psychology. And I didn't understand why the church people I hung out with were so averse to counseling. And come to find out, there's this theological approach somewhere in yesteryear that says, everything that's not of the printed word is of the occult or something. And so it's like, if you're dabbling in psychology, it's not Christian. It's like, well, it turns out Jung's writings are very, very heavily Christian influenced. And I find distinct overlap between the two fields and the two disciplines. So when I teach this stuff, it makes complete sense to me. I think that we all have a spark of divinity within us. I think we all have evil within us because we're born fallen human beings in a fallen world. All we're doing is efforting our best to align ourselves with God. And that fits with Jung's hypothesis too, which is that if you're aligned with God's path for your life, you're not in distress. You don't have mental illness. If you're misaligned, then yes, you are. And the misalignment can take many, many forms. But how it manifests, I think, is the symptom. It's the symptom of the drinking, the anxiety, the sucking down cigarettes, the depression, the bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, basically anything that's in our diagnostic and statistical manual, DSM, which is like our way of identifying illness. anything that's in there is the symptom. And I'm not into symptom treatment. I want problem resolution. I want to know why the symptoms gave rise in the first place.
Yeah.
Because if I'm in the symptom treatment and I'm doing the evidence-based practice and I'm doing all the BTs, the behavioral therapies, I can end up playing therapeutic whack-a-mole. I take away your drinking and anxiety erupts. I take away your anxiety and depression erupts. So when you deal with your depression, now all of a sudden you're lashing out at your kids because you can't control your emotions. So I don't want to play therapeutic whack-a-mole. I want to unplug the machine and have them all stop popping up altogether. And the problems, not the symptoms, the problems generally are a source or sourced from, they're a function of a lack of sense of self. It's a lack of grounded identity. And for me, my grounded identity is in a son of God, follower of Christ, because that is immutable. That's never going to leave. It's eternal. It always was. It always will be. It always has been. And there's guidance along with it in the form of scripture. So it works really well for me. That's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's fine. But what you do have to do is ground yourself in something bigger than you. And then it's not magic, but the psychiatric ailments just kind of disappear when people find out who they are, what their purpose is. Now, it doesn't alleviate life from happening. Life is going to throw things at you. But if you're grounded, if you're well-oriented, if you're structured, if you know your direction and your purpose, then you're better able to weather the storms of life when they blow so that the tempest doesn't just take your boat and send it off into the ocean. You have an anchor, and that's called resilience. And people who lack resilience, whether it's taught or absorbed along the way, they're the ones who tend to be perpetually in distress, perpetually ill. And we have names for these things. They're all in the DSM. But I don't care about that. I see through the outward behavioral presentation of the individual into the soul of the human on the inside to try to help them reorient and anchor in a way that's meaningful and purposeful for them, because that's how healing occurs. So this stuff goes hand in glove. And that's that moment, I think, sitting at the little Waldorf Saloon here in Rio was one of the galvanizing moments in my life where I was like, I can't walk away. I am called to do counseling now. So even though I had the frustrating experience of it in Klein Village up at Lake Tahoe at the school, I knew I wasn't supposed to be there anyway. I wasn't supposed to be on college campuses. I was supposed to be serving the community. And I'm doing that now in various forms and manifestations, one of which I'd love to talk about too, which is Walk the Talk America, but we can get to that.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to get to that. That's exciting as well. So you have this catalyzing moment of learning this kind of opening a new world of how to understand human interaction, human behavior, and knowing that it's not reductionist in the sense of, it can just be reduced to a few numbers, a few plots and charts and whatnot, but that these motivations are really crucial, and trying to understand that allows you to window into the soul in a different way. And I think, there's so much more we can even unpack there. I mean, even to the point of like, it doesn't mean that there's never chemical imbalances or other things like that. There's lots and lots of complications, and human life is complicated.
Honestly, I would chalk that up to sin nature. If I'm being quite frank, like we know like what 3 paragraphs worth of human existence pre-fall. The rest of the Bible is like, after the destruction, right?
Yeah.
So we can only speculate and hypothesize as to what God's plan for us was before we got tempted into evil. And one of my speculations and hypotheses is that pre-fall, we didn't have illness at all. Like there's no cancer, there's no colds, flus. So I would chalk up any sort of aberrant human experience that's not perfectly pure and clean to be just part of the sinful world in which we live, including, you're born without an arm, or, you got some cognitive deficiency, or whatever it is, right? Violence. Like, I don't think that was supposed to exist in God's design for us to live in harmony with him. So while we're trying to get back to that, trying to align ourselves with God and find harmony, I happen to believe that evil ramps up its attempts to separate. So as we heal, the problem actually gets harder, because Satan kind of pokes his head up and looks around and goes, whoa, I'm losing one, right? Back to the Lord. So I think that's part of the complication too. So we can say chemical imbalance, that's fine, but I also think the chemical imbalances aren't by God's design. That's not normal.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I don't disagree with that either. But I guess what I was just getting at is that there's a lot to unpack, and a lot of even more complexities that undergird a lot of this stuff, and that we have to, and we're mindful of those things throughout the profession, I'm sure.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and so you've taken all these new understandings, and you want to serve the community, so you start a business around it. I mean, that's got to be a big decision too. What kind of led you toward this almost entrepreneurial journey as part of this, and what did you have to do to kind of shift in your ways of thinking in order to make that happen?
When we started Zephyr, I say we because there were 3 partners in the beginning back in 2015, and it was me, Bodie Coates, and Lindsay, then Garrison, now she's Bell. And what we did was, so I went to grad school with Bodie. I met Lindsay through another employment endeavor, and then we were all working together at this one agency on contract. And we were just frustrated with the way that the profession was. And we looked around and we realized that there were very few options for new grads to work in the field. It basically was, so when you graduate, you become an intern, a state licensed intern in Nevada. Some places they call it an associateship, but it's analogous to a resident doctor. You got your license, you can practice, but you're practicing under somebody else's license. So you have to do that for several thousand hours, and then you graduate into full licensure independently. So anyway, we were all some form or fashion of intern early on when we met. We were working together, and the options for new grad interns are very few. Like I said, it's either government, like social services, or state rural clinics, something like that. You could work for a corporate health entity, like a hospital. Like I spent 2 years working for a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents. Or you work for a contract entity that largely just abuses you and inappropriately takes advantage of your labor and often commits fraud without you knowing it. And I have a whole paper that I was inspired to write on the differences between 1099 contract work and W-2 employee work in this field. And my bias is very, very heavily toward the W-2. It's just way more expensive for an employer to do that than to contract. So they default to the cheaper method, but there's all sorts of complications that come with that. So when we formed Zephyr, what we realized was that there wasn't an option for agency work for people who just wanted to do therapy and not be bothered with corporate dollar focus over care, or with .gov, which was equally frustrating in many cases and sometimes suffocating and sometimes runs into the ground, or for the really intense hospital settings. So there just wasn't an option. So what everybody ended up doing was fleeing into private practice after their internships. So that was everybody's goal. It's like, I can't wait to get into private practice, tack up my own shingle and do my own billing and all that stuff. But the simple fact is not everybody's cut out for that.
Yeah.
And it can be more lucrative for sure because you don't have a bunch of overhead to take care of for your employees. But we just realized that there's some people out there who wanted to just work and just do therapy. So we created Zephyr. And then we created it at a time when a lot of those contract 1099 fly-by-night companies were just proliferating. So we made it different. We said Zephyr Wellness, Jake, Bodie, Lindsay. We literally put our names on the logo to let everybody know that it was locally owned by local people who had deep roots in the community. We weren't just going to like parachute in, commit a bunch of fraud, and then disappear by dark of night, leaving whole communities wounded, which did happen multiple times. But then Bodie didn't make it a year. And so he sold out his part to Lindsay and I. We had to change the tagline. So we changed it to innovative and philanthropic because what we realized along the way is not only did we want to be different as an agency offering employment to up and coming therapists, we wanted to definitely be a training shop. Part of the innovative and philanthropic was in the form of offering graduate program hours for students who are looking to complete their degrees. So we've hosted graduate students since 2015. We've hosted undergraduates too for many, many years. And that's part of the give back, but it's also part of being able to shepherd in new talent and create a workforce pipeline for ourselves, of course, but also for the community. So we're augmenting the profession. We wanted to do things differently than just be a therapy shop in the shadows. We wanted to be an active, vibrant, well-integrated small business in the community, showing up at places like tabling events, sponsoring youth sports. We wanted to move the profession into the light. We wanted to be on social media, actively promoting, cool talking points or whatever. Created a YouTube channel. 2017, we launched a podcast called Noggin Notes, which I'd love to talk about too.
Yeah.
All these things, by the way, would make our professors' heads pop off their shoulders. You're not supposed to do that. Therapists are supposed to be weird and live in the shadows and not talk about therapy and something confidentiality. It's like, well, there's lots of professions out there that protect confidentiality, and they're not weird. When I go to Costco and I see my dentist, he doesn't ask me about my teeth, but he also doesn't like turn his cart down the other aisle and suspiciously run away. It's like, you want to know where mental health stigma comes from? It comes from us. And we literally get taught that in school. Like, if you see your client, and we call them clients too, which bothers me. I want to call them patients because it draws us closer to the medical umbrella. But, if you see your client in public, don't acknowledge them unless they acknowledge you first. And if they do, then you better not talk about it's like, just knock it up. Can we be humans? Can we just be nice people to each other? We all live in a community. So that's been part of what we do too, is we get out, we get loud, we get active. We want to be telling people how to fix their own issues.
Mm-hmm.
So we live in a healthy community. I don't want to turn this into some grift where I'm hiding behind a curtain, pulling levers on somebody's mind and they don't know what's happening. And they just walk out and they're like, I feel better after talking to my therapist, but I don't know why. It's like, you better know why so you can sustain it. I want to work myself out of a job. So that's the thing. And then 2021, Lindsay sold her portion to me. So now I've owned it fully since 2021. And it's been awesome. We have a really good culture here. We get lots of time off. We're closed the weeks of Christmas to New Year's, the week of Independence Day, all federal holidays. We don't work on weekends. Everybody gets 2 weeks of PTO on top of all that I just listed. We were matching 401k, pay for their health insurance, 50%. Like it's a good place to work, I think.
So maybe I need to consider some shifts myself. No, it sounds great. No, it's really good. And you hinted at a couple of things I think are really interesting. Like you're actively working to try and disabuse your potential patients of the false notions of your profession, about the false things they may believe about mental health and whatnot. And I think that's where I kind of want to head next for a second, because I think this is really important. A lot of us, especially in the church, and you hinted at this earlier, noting that that people in the church sometimes have false views about what it means to be healthy and have a healthy mental state. Like if it's not coming from scripture, well, then it must be of the occult. And yeah, I've heard similar sorts of things before. So let's talk about that a little more. Let's unpack that, because I think you're very interested in being like throwing back the curtain and not acting like what everybody else wants seems to be like in this profession at times. What are you trying to do? Like, what are your objectives there? And what are you trying to communicate? What are some of those misconceptions that you want to disabuse people of with regards to mental health, the profession, what you're trying to do with counseling, and so on? And you can kind of just take it from there. And like those sorts of missional aspects of what you're doing, I think are really interesting.
I'll quote my very good friend and pastor, Louis Locke. I attend a Foursquare church called Hillside, and hillside4.org if people are interested. Louis is parroting a belief that I believe he got from Jerry Cook, who's written several books. I'm staring at one of them called The Monday Morning Church.
Wow.
And I think it came from Jerry. It says, God answers prayers through people.
Mm-hmm.
And I see myself as one of those people who answers prayers. And it sounds a little weird, arrogant, narcissistic to say that, but I have to embrace that if I'm going to do my job well.
Yeah.
I got the opportunity. We started attending church at Hillside back in 2011 before we got married. And we've been there ever since. And I, again, raised Catholic, I never saw myself really integrating into a church community, but boy, we did. Served 4 years on the church council. At one point, Louis texts me, he says, hey, I'm going to be out of town this and such date. Do you want to give the teaching? Call them teachings, not sermons. And I was like, me? Hey, what do I have to offer? Because I didn't see myself as that guy, right? I'm young in the faith. I don't really know much. I don't know scripture that well. But what am I going to do? Say no? So I taught yield theory, which is from Christian Conti, and I taught it the 7 components of yield theory substantiated by scripture. And I thought it was super cool that I could talk about non-attachment and stuff like that with scriptural backing, like actual references to doctrine. That was 2013, I want to say. And I've done it several more times, including with another therapist friend of mine who pastors his own church, Dave Reed, here in town. And we've talked about emotional functioning. We've talked about attachment theory. We've talked about lots of things. And it's like, if I'm ever on stage at Hillside and I don't talk about psychological concepts, people are disappointed. So like, that's the expectation. But in so doing, what I've seen is people from our church community who probably never would have otherwise entered the counseling realm, getting marriages healed, overcoming addictions, improving their parenting, letting go of their anger, stuff that's just, it's so humbling. It's not through me. I'm not counseling these people individually because I know them too well, but that's why I have my staff. That's why we grew this business. So when somebody goes, "Hey, Jake, I trust you, therefore I probably trust the people you hire. I'd like some help." Good, go, call Zephyr. And they do. And sure enough, healing happens. And I think that's really, really special. So one of the things I'd like to share is that the overlap between psychology and counseling and Christian followership is like the Venn diagram is basically a circle. We are spiritual beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my profession has done a really good job of telling people that's not the case. And I think the Christian community writ large has done a really good job of telling people that they don't need help from others. It's like, and not to get too rabbit traily, but that sets up churches to be really narcissistically abusive. And we know that the landscape is littered with those types of institutions who really perpetrate harm on their on their memberships because the council in charge or the pastor or whoever has given a message that says, "Thou shalt not receive feedback on one's life except through God, and I am the conduit." And the speaker, the megaphone through which, right? And so they position themselves very authoritarian, like in the congregation's life, and it becomes a feedback loop of narcissistic self-aggrandizement. So beware of that. If you have a pastor who's like, poo-pooing the counseling field, I would look very hard at the transparency of that leadership and see why they are doing that. Because I've almost seen a one-to-one correlation in churches that do that. Now, there's some churches that say, "We'd love to have a counseling program," but then they tell their counselors exactly how and when to operate too. And that's not right either. We have licenses, we have our own ethical codes and so forth. You can't work for two pastors. So anyway, that's one myth. The other myth is like emotional functioning, which is one of my bailiwicks. I got a YouTube channel, a bunch of free videos. This is part of it. Go to the Zephyr site, type in emotional functioning, it'll pop right up. Watch my videos. It's just me standing in front of a whiteboard talking about feelings. But it's so critically important because God gave us these brains for a reason. And the 10 core emotions that we all have all serve a function. And that function is to know how to respond adequately to our environments. And if we've been taught through parents or clergy or school or whatever, or Little League coaches, that we're not, quote unquote, supposed to have certain feelings. And dudes struggle with this more than chicks typically do, but you're not supposed to, don't let the sun go down on your anger or whatever. It's like, well, maybe we should explore why you're angry in the first place. And maybe the best thing you could do is actually stay up figuring it out so you can go to bed at peace. And what's beneath the anger? Some more vulnerable emotion that we're not supposed to feel, like fear, sadness, shame, and sometimes even happiness. You're not allowed to feel that sometimes too. And all this points to vulnerability. All this points to humility. All this points to intimacy, because you can't have intimacy without vulnerability. You can't have humility without vulnerability. And what does God want from us? He wants us to kneel and submit. Well, what more vulnerable position do you have than on your knees? But you're not going to get there if emotionally you've stunted yourself to say, I don't need to feel these things. I don't need to be humble, vulnerable, because every time I've been vulnerable in the past, I've been whacked, right? A lot of people come from abusive upbringings, neglectful upbringings, or they've been spoiled and never had any boundaries. Yeah. And what they do is they end up defaulting to intellectual functioning to explain things, explain God's grace, explain God's forgiveness, explain Christ's death, instead of receiving it. Receiving requires vulnerability, and through vulnerability, you get intimacy. And through intimacy, you have authentic connection with other humans, including yourself. that's how we get to concepts like self-forgiveness. So this all overlaps. If you know your emotions and you know what they're telling you, you can tolerate them, you can embrace them, you can let them go, you can learn from them. And then by doing so, get closer to your fellow humans as well as closer to God. And who doesn't want that, right? We all talk like we want that. We all talk like, we're saved people, right? But are you really? If you're doing the intellectual heavy lifting just to sidestep and circumvent the actual consequence of living a Christ follower's life, which is humbly submitting everything. And I myself have had many, many mistakes in my life where I don't need to get into them now, but where God really, really stood up for me and through other people. And I've struggled to receive that because as an intellectual myself, I guess it's hard to be vulnerable, but that's right. Exactly what's required. Right. So that's the other thing I'd like to say is like, don't pretend like your emotions don't matter. There's been a lot of really warped interpretations from biblical scholars along the way who have said things like, don't allow this to run your life. It's like, well, yeah, don't allow it to run your life, but also don't pretend like it's not a part of your life. We have these physical bodies for a reason. We're made in God's image, maybe not physically. We don't have whatever your physical image anthropomorphized of God is, but the image of God is grace, love, forgiveness, tenderness, boundary setting, accountability, right? That's the image of God. And I think we get there through something like a counseling experience if you need it. And by the way, not everybody needs counseling. I know it sounds heretical for an entrepreneur counsel person with his own business. Don't come into my office. But dude, we should be treating the ill. We should be treating the sick, and then the sick should heal. Counseling should not be in perpetuity. I should not be artificially clogging my calendar until who knows when, Tuesday at 4 p.m. I'm going to see you every week. Like, no, there should be a goal. There should be objectives to that goal. And when you hit that goal, you're done. I don't go mining for more problems so I can keep milking your insurance company, right? So this should be quantifiable, time limited, and we move on once you're good. So yeah, there's lots of myths that I could bust about counseling and religion, but mostly it's like embrace who you are, stand on how God made you in His image for a purpose. And if you're off kilter and you just can't figure it out and you need professional advice, to find somebody. And there's lots of us out there there's a whole Christian counseling, and I don't mean Christian counseling is a different thing, but there's people who are Christians who are counselors who are happy to help you. And I found also that a lot of us are quite liberty loving too.
Yeah,
I fall into that category.
Well, and I want to kind of shift into because there's this connects to something else that you're doing too. Which is beyond just your entrepreneurial venture and the types of things that you're doing for counseling. You have some connective tissues there with these other kind of, dare I say, and maybe it's not right to call them side projects, but they're important things that you're trying to get ideas out there, walk the talk and Noggin Notes and whatnot. Tell us a little bit about those because I think what you're doing there is really important.
And
you can start with whatever you like.
We'll start with Noggin Notes because it's a cool story. Actually, they're both really cool stories, but one leads to the other. So I'll start with the older one. So Noggin Notes is a podcast that started out as an app, and this was 2016. Fraternity brother friend of mine who's over in the Orient. He was in Macau, China for a long time, and ended up in Cambodia. Rubbed elbows with this guy named Safiso Rapinga. Safiso is from South Africa. They're working together in the gaming community. Lauren, my friend, started in Reno and worked for International Game Technology. And they sent him overseas. And then eventually, somebody started his own company and whatever. And so Safiso and Lauren are working together. Safiso's got some history with mental health struggles and whatnot. And he has a heart for the field, but knows nothing about it. Meets a guy named Tom Phillips from the UK. Tom is an app developer. Safiso has the idea. He's like, let's develop a mental health app. So they did. Yeah. And Lauren overhears this. Lauren says, I'm talking to my buddy Jake in the States. He does this for a living. So late 2016, we take a Skype call back when people use Skype. And I'm talking to these guys and I'm like, how cool is this? I'm talking to a guy in Cambodia. I was thinking, this is awesome. So Tom and Safiso and I go over the app. And I was like, that's a really cool idea, but you clearly don't know what you're doing. Let me help you. So I steered him toward emotional functioning. And I said, just structure it this way. I said, thanks for the advice. Would you like to write some articles? We want to embed articles in the app to really help people. I said, sure. But so at the time, I just concluded a 16 or 18 months of on-air AM, nobody listens to it, radio. And I said, what's faster than writing is talking. Let's do a podcast. And they're like, that's a great idea. How do we do that? I was like, I have no idea. I just thought it was an idea. So we figured out how to do a podcast. 2017, Noggin Notes podcast launches, and it's embedded into the app. Now, along the way, the app became very expensive. None of us had any money, so we let the app part of it go. But we kept the podcast. So for like 5 straight years on a weekly basis or something, I was doing this podcast. And I still, to this day, have no idea how that occurred. I was talking to people around the world. I was learning so much stuff, and it was super fun to just learn. I've never made a dime off the thing. So if you're like, oh, podcast you've had for 7 years, it's international. It's like, no, not really. But it spun off because Safiso's from South Africa and he's in Cambodia. It spun off to 2 other podcasts, Noggin Notes Cambodia and Noggin Notes Africa. And now Safiso he's still in Cambodia. He's trying really hard to make this work. But Noggin Notes has become a consultation agency because people in the East don't have any understanding of mental health at all. Right. Certainly not emotional functioning. And certainly in Cambodia, which in our lifetime, Norman, experienced a genocide. And they're still dealing with the trauma effects of that, but no way to address it. So the youth are connected online to the West, and they're like, what's this mental health stuff? What's this emotion stuff? And there's nobody in their own communities who can do it. So they find this Noggin Notes is nearby because internet. And they're like, oh, Safiso, this, I don't know anything. So he goes back, gets a certificate in mental health, whatever, psychology, whatever, and starts being a consultant for universities and businesses and whatnot down in the Phnom Penh region. But then he's got a buddy back in South Africa who started the Noggin Notes Africa podcast. And we've all been on each other's shows. And now Noggin Notes Africa kind of died off a little bit because it couldn't sustain. But it's like, holy cow, I'm a part of an international organization that like does mental health in cultures that don't even understand it and never have. So that's pretty cool. But along the way, I'm looking for guests. And one of my other good fraternity brother friends manages our local firearms range and retail store called Reno Guns and Range. His name's Jordan. Jordan texted me one day. He says, hey, have you heard of Walk the Talk America? This is back in 2019. I said, no. So I looked up them. Them turned out to be a very fancy looking board of directors, but a one-man show named Michael Sedini. And so I reach out to them and ask them if they wanted to be on the podcast. And Mike replies immediately and says, yeah, I'd love to. So he comes on Noggin Notes and we talk about Walk the Talk America. Well, Walk the Talk America, if you're wondering why firearms came into the picture, why the gun range guy asked me about it, is a nonprofit bridging the gap between firearms ownership and mental health care to make sure that firearms owners get access to counseling services without fear of rights restriction. Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal because there's an ever-expanding push to get states to adopt what are called red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders, or in California, it's called the Gun Violence Protection Order, Restraining Order. New York, they have the New York Safe Act. And the idea is that if you're deemed to be as a threat to self or others due to mental illness, and you have firearms, the state can take your firearms away for a temporary period of time to keep you safe, of course. And we all know the problems with that and the landmines that are rife. Yeah, but we're trying to make it okay for gun owners to get services without worrying that they're going to lose their rights, or lose their job, or lose their status at work, or lose their promotion opportunity, or lose their clearance if they're in the military. So the flip side of that is we're also trying to train practitioners in my realm, but healthcare broadly, to be more culturally sensitive to firearms owners. So we're teaching gun culture to mental health practitioners to make sure that they're not clumsy and fumbling and awkward with their language when they encounter somebody who's, in the counseling office for anxiety or whatever, or they have a suicidal teenager, and we don't chase them away, because that's when things get worse. So really at our core, we're a suicide prevention organization, but we want to get upstream from that instead of most suicide prevention, which is telling you how to intervene in with somebody's crisis at the time of crisis. we're trying to teach people how to remain healthy in the first place, while also saying, hey, practitioners, here, it's okay to prescribe range time for your veteran with PTSD. Don't just pick up the bat phone to .gov and take their property because you think they're unsafe. Let's get more acculturated to this. And so we've been guided by a guy named Johnny Pirelli, who wrote, I'm staring at it here, The Behavioral Science of Firearms, and then Firearms in Clinical Practice. We created a cultural competence course, 3 parts, 10 and a half total hours, 2 of which are downloadable for free on the website. We have a program called Kids to Kings, which works with inner city youth. Our pilot program is in Atlanta, Georgia, so i.e. Black youth who are always around unsecured firearms in very dangerous circumstances, teaching them proper firearms safety, handling techniques, ownership, storage, also demystifying what they're seeing in hip-hop videos. So Kids to Kings aims to stem some of the cultural violence that goes along with unsecured firearms in impoverished areas and inner cities. We have instructor slides for firearms instructors whose states have in some cases mandated an hour of quote unquote mental health training, and they don't know how to do that. So we just provide an hour's worth of content with plug and play videos. And then most importantly, we offer free and anonymous mental health screenings. So you can go to the website. There's like 14 or 16 different screenings. A couple of them are in Spanish, or you can just log in. They're powered by Mental Health America. They have high fidelity. Your information goes nowhere. They're completely anonymous. They ask for some demographics so they know what type of people are taking. But you answer 7 or 12 questions, it spits you out a score. If the score's a little higher than you like, maybe you need to seek professional advice or service. And if not, cool. You move on with your day. So the screenings, the videos, we have a podcast called Guns and Mental Health now that we launched 4 years ago. We've been doing that pretty much weekly the whole time, where we explore stories, people with exciting products in the firearms community. Almost everybody has a suicide story, either attempt survivor of completed suicide, something like that. They're always powerful. Some of them are quite tear-jerking. And it ranges from random people to industry leaders to cops and military veterans, men, women, minorities. So that's almost a full-time job for me. I don't take a dime from it. Mike's the only paid employee, and we have a lot of volunteer efforts. We're trying to grow it. Donate if you want. You can go to the website, check it out, WTTA.org. But yet again, it's one of those innovative things that Zephyr wants to be a part of. What I did several years ago in explaining Zephyr Wellness to people about how we take all these insurances and the Medicaids and everything is, I had a SpaceX slide in there. I said, I want to be the SpaceX of behavioral health, doing things nobody's ever thought of before. And inevitably somebody in the audience would be like, well, what do you think you're going to do next? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't thought of it yet. I go where God guides me. And so far he's been guiding me into this gun mental health world, because as a concealed carrying firearms owning practitioner, I'm an anomaly. And I realized in talking to Mike way back when, 5 years ago, that I had to play a role in this community. I had an uncle take his own life with a firearm who worked for the PD back in 1985 when I was like 7 years old. And so I've been touched by it. And I just, there's 110, 114 million gun owners out there in the world. Like, my profession ain't great at receiving them. So I need to make sure that I step into that void and appropriately bridge the gap and say, not only is it acceptable for you to receive care, it's required if you're going to be a healthy individual. I don't want to see people taking their lives with firearms when it can otherwise be prevented if they would just get into care. Yeah. And we've got a lot of barriers to care. And it's not just suicides. It's marriages that are devolving, and we can improve parenting. We can certainly improve children's performance in school. But if you're a gun owner and you're like, I don't want to go to those counseling people, that sucks. And I don't think that should be the case. So along the way, we're trying to get more firearms owning practitioners, or people who are at least friendly to the cause or get it or understand it, to come out of the closet. So I've faced a lot of blowback, and I've talked about this a lot too in different presentations. It was hard for me to come out of the closet as a firearms owning therapist because my peer colleagues don't like guns, and by extension they don't like gun owners, and they didn't know that I was sitting right there while they were disparaging all this all these people because I didn't tell them, because I didn't want to tell them. And for some reason in my mind, the opinions and value statements of my peer colleagues were like more important than the community. And I was like, no, this is inverted. I can't care about what my former professor thinks. I have to think about the hundreds and thousands of people in my own community right here in Sparks, Nevada, who probably aren't getting care because they have a head full of misinformation. So I just need to make it more welcoming. So far, what Zephyr's done is we've intentionally pivoted to target that demographic, not just the gun owners, but the political conservatives, the libertarians, the centrists, the religious, to say, come in, all you people who have been neglected by our field because we've been pandering to certain demographics over others. You're welcome here, and it's worked.
Well, that's really interesting, and it just goes to show, like, once again, a lot of the misinformation is out there is the propagation of, frankly, the powers that be, and not the reality of the situation. And what you're doing, I think, is really important because it's shedding light on these topics in a way that I've never seen before. It's like that's why I found what you've had to say today and previously when we in our private conversation is just so fascinating. And I'm so glad we were able to do this. So as we begin to kind of draw to a close, like, we've talked a lot about your journey and what this is like, all this has meant to you, and the twists and the turns and the weird stuff and the wacky stuff. But you also, like, I'm sure that you have some critical, like, ideas, like, what sorts of things would you have wanted to know that would, like, this is like my go back in time question I like to ask all of our people who come on the show. It's like, imagine that you could go back in time and give yourself some great advice about work, business, faith, how those all work together. And, in light of what you've learned over the years, what are some of those most important things that you'd want to get across, especially to our younger listeners on this show?
If I could do this without crying. Well, I haven't given a lot of thought to this, honestly, because there's a Jordan Peterson interview, and I forget which one. He's interviewed some gal, and or she's interviewing him, and she asked him about the Pepe the Frog thing, and he posed with some kids with the Pepe thing, and she's like, would you go back in time and not do that? And he paused for like the longest time, and ultimately he says, no, I would not betray my former self. And I think there's a lot of value and merit to that. We, in our wise years, look back and go, I wish I had, or I wish I hadn't, right? And I think that exercise is not only futile because you can't unring the bell, but it also creates a bit of a psychotic alternate reality that never could have been, and fundamentally changes the path that got walked. So I think an appropriate metaphor is the Back to the Future series. And
sure.
You tinker with the past, you're going to affect the future. And if you're 1 degree off and you accelerate 25 years, you're no longer 1 degree off. You're many, many, many degrees off. So without being glib, all the things that I did made me now. However, I want to take your question seriously. And I think if I could go back in time, there are certain adjustments that I would make to my awareness of evil and its presence in life. I think I have done a pretty good job connecting with, I'll drop another name here for people who are interested. Joshua Slocum has a podcast called Disaffected, and everyone should listen to it. He talks about cluster B personality disorders, which is your histrionic, borderline, antisocial, and narcissistic, and how they present in systems like governments and churches and schools and businesses and on in society writ large. And to be able to identify those is critical to saving your own sanity. But I think I've done a really good job of doing that and recognize that much faster than most people in my orbit. And it wasn't fast enough to save me from some very disastrous decisions, interpersonally, relationally, whatnot. So I would want to tell my younger self not to be afraid of stepping into God's love because you think you know it all. I would want to have done that much earlier in my life. But had I done it, I probably would have married somebody else. I probably wouldn't have the kids I do. And maybe my life would have been great. But I probably would have done something not mental health related. This career path was because of missteps.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I want to be careful when I say, like I'm echoing Jordan Peterson here. I say, I don't want to betray my former self, because it's brought me to where I am today. And I think that's why I get to be so compassionate, because I do study this stuff. I've been blessed with great mentors who have forced me to self-examine to the point that I can't not anymore. Once you learn systems, once you learn systemic functioning, you can't see the world any differently. It's like when you really learn liberty, you can't not see tyranny everywhere.
Yeah.
Freedom. And that's human nature too. I think human nature, look across time, like people want to control others, control the money supply, and why? Evil. Like they'll say that their motivations and aspirations are good and healthy, and it sounds great to the human ear, but it's the human ear, right? It's not the God ear. So I would say that. I would say read the Screw Tape Letters in your early 20s.
Multiple times.
Take it to heart, right? Yeah. I didn't read that until like last year, and it was
too
late. Yeah. But now I get it, right? Now I get it. So that's what I would say to myself. It's like, appreciate what you're doing, but maybe act a little more wisely. Maybe don't fall into that pattern of addiction that you had. Maybe don't go hang out with those people just because you're seeking identity and ego feeding. Maybe don't stay out so late at the nightclub. Maybe you didn't need the DJ job just because it was fun, like because there was some darkness that came along with it, right? And all every step of the way, God was with me, and I didn't see it until very, very recently. And this is where I get choked up and give thanks to my wife for allowing Christ to channel through her, because without her, without the Holy Spirit, I wouldn't be where I am now. And having overcome some very dark stuff. So, plug in. The faster you can plug in, the sooner you can see evil manifesting, the clearer everything becomes. And unfortunately, I think when we do see that, we have to set boundaries in our life, and we end up quite lonely for a little while, because the friends we thought we had aren't really friends. And some of the people we didn't know existed become friends, all because of a shifting and a recognition that what was tantalizing was not necessarily godly.
That's awesome, and it's good to remember that number one, that we can't change the past. We have to accept its effect upon us, and I think that's an important it's an important point, and I think we should never forget that too. But I'm glad that you were able to kind of garner something here that really it's meaningful to hear these types of stories, where you've been, why it's important, and what things you would, what you would pay attention to a little differently in order to make a difference, even more so down the way. And I'm thankful that you were on the show today, sir. This has been really, really phenomenal. I'm super glad that we were finally able to do this. And before we go, let's just remind people where they can find you online, where to go for Zephyr Wellness, your podcast, your YouTube channels. Let's run through that real quick and make sure that everybody knows where to go to get more of you.
Before that, thank you, because it's very rare that I get to talk like this about all things hybridizing into my life. It's really, usually they're in pockets, if they don't touch each other. So thank you for having a platform and a format that allows all of those things, the liberty loving, the firearms owning, the clinical, the faith journey. Like that's really, really cool. So thank you. And it affirms that I'm not crazy, that things can and do exist simultaneously. They're not all mutually exclusive. All right. So I'm currently deactivated from X, but and that was just for my own mental sanity. I'll probably go back at some point, because I do find it edifying for the most part, but I needed to cool with the distraction. But I'm at Jake Wisk everywhere, JakeWisk personally. So if I ever go back on X, I'll be there. ZephyrWellness.org, ZEPHYR, ZephyrWellness.org. We have like I said, look up the emotional functioning videos. Those are cool. Mm-hmm. WTTA, WalkTheTalkAmerica.org. Noggin Notes is available anywhere podcasts are found. And Guns and Mental Health is the other one, available anywhere podcasts are found. If you want the free and anonymous screenings, they're available both on the Zephyr site and the WTTA site. Feel free to reach out to me, info@zephyrwellness.org. We'll go through the front desk and they'll send it on to me. And info@wtta.org goes to Mike, or admin, I think, at wtta.org. Then can't give a strong enough shout out to Christian Conte and his work. He's got a phenomenal YouTube channel that is so good. If you're interested in this psychology stuff, please watch his stuff. It's so good. So that's it. And there's books to read, and we have recommendations on the website. So I'm not going to get into all that. But
we'll probably try to include that in our show notes and whatnot, and make sure that these links are there too for you to follow immediately. So Jake Wiskerchen, we're so I did it wrong again, but I did it. Yeah. I'll get it there eventually. Yeah, I'll get it there eventually. But Jake, we're so glad that you've been here today. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. And so for everybody who's been tuning in, thank you for tuning in at this point. And we will see you next time on the Faith Ventures podcast.